Hello and welcome to the Last Edit Podcast, a weekly film podcast with yours truly, Citizen Sleeve, and my quite wonderful friend.
Silver Hawkins.
Now we're continuing our cinematic odyssey this week of the Coen Brothers with their fourth film, 1991's Barton Fink. This is a film which is quite unusual within their first set of four, and of course don't forget we have covered Miller's Crossing before, and I'll put the link in the description down below for you to have a listen to that. It's an unusual film in that it's a comedy drama, or maybe a drama comedy in some senses. There are some very humorous moments. But it's essentially about a writer called Barton Fink, a playwright, a very successful playwright, who is offered a Hollywood contract to write a wrestling movie. And he kind of takes himself away. He's played by Jon Turturro, by the way, who would become a staple of later Coen's films. And he takes himself away to some kind of seedy hotel to engage in the writing of this film and suffers monumental writer's block. And that's the very, very basic setup. And Silver knows this film a touch better than I do, so I'll let him take you on to the overall synopsis. But it's a film that features, as I mentioned, Jon Turturro as the lead character, John Goodman, who's amazing and is in a plethora of Coen's films. Michael Lerner, Judy Davis, John Mahoney, Steve Buscemi plays a small part in it, Jon Polito, Tony Shalhoub. There is an array of cracking character actors who fill most of the roles in this film. And I guess it's kind of an exploration of Barton's ever unraveling mind and the characters that segue into that experience as the film develops. So I hadn't seen this for a little while, certainly not as long as I hadn't seen Raising Arizona or Blood Simple, or even Miller's Crossing. I'd probably seen it in the last, I don't know, 5-6 years or something. But you said you'd seen it the prior year or two. So coming back to it, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, it's probably the Coen film that I'm most sort of apprehensive toward talking about because it's been probably the most thoroughly analyzed in their library, because it was really Barton Fink is the movie that sort of put them on the map. Like, to say Barton Fink made a smash at Cannes is like the understatement of the century. I mean, Barton Fink basically made them rewrite the rules at Cannes, because that film came in and it just swept all the awards. It won Best Actor for Turturro, it won Best Director for Joel and Ethan, and it won Best Film for the Golden Palm. And after that, the Cannes organizers basically said, no, we can't have that. We can't have one movie running away with everything. So we were going to ban that.
Not the Oscars.
Going
Let's
forward.
back away.
Yeah. So the movie basically engendered that entire rule change. And yeah, I mean it's so, because it's so funny and frustrating at the same time with the Coens, and it's one reason why a lot of the time when I see other people discuss the Coens, there's a certain contingent of people who get very angry because the Coens don't give you readily made answers. They're very ambiguous both in the movie, and then they basically refuse to discuss the subjects of their movies, what they're about. They leave it entirely up to you. That they're just happy to let their movies stand on their own, and that's actually one of the things that appeals to me so much about their films, because their films are whatever you infuse it with. So your interpretation is no less true than any other interpretation, really. There is no anyone who says they have the symbolic interpretation of what Barton Fink means, they're full of shit. But I mean, there are certainly some very, very overt themes in the movie. I mean, it's it's pretty undeniable that the Hotel Earl, where Barton gets installed, is a very uncomfortable place. It's very hot there, very humid. We only ever see we never see people ascend up the elevator or anywhere. We only see them descend. The only room we ever see is Barton's. We never see Charlie Meadows' room, his neighbors. We never see any other hotel guest room. We never even see any other hotel guest other than Charlie Meadows.
Yeah.
Like the only hotel employees we see are the hotel operator, who's a very old man who has like shades of Charon the ferryman about him. And then we see what is it, Brett? I forget.
Chet.
Chet, yeah. the bellhop, receptionist at the hotel, Earl. And aside from that, no one else is there. Like, it's entirely vacant.
Mm.
And like you say, it plays out. The entire movie plays out very much as sort of Barton's descent into madness or despair, as he struggles with the writing block of writing this wrestling picture. And Barton Fink is very much, he's a character very much in the vein of like 30s and 40s playwrights, of Brecht, like the very socially conscious, socially aware, communist leaning playwrights were basically writing for the proletariat, the working class, and whatnot. And he comes out of that theater environment, and he basically gets transferred to Hollywood, where they seek to sort of monetize that artistic vein that he mines. And like, I mean, Michael Lerner as the studio mogul, Jack Lipnick, out of both Jack, like basically an amalgam of like Jack Warner and other huge movie moguls at the time. It's just amazing. Like the scene, the scene toward the end where he's asked for an army commission, and it hasn't come through yet, but he's still asked like the costume prop department to make him a uniform, like a colonel's uniform. Just full pretentiousness of it, and that's actually based on a real historical event. Jack Warner actually did that. Like, that is just like the height of that sense of ego is just sort of really fascinating.
And in that period, it's important to mention that these movie moguls, like, you might think they're quite powerful now. In that era, they were very powerful because cinema
Yes.
was the most powerful
get-
and new of mediums.
You get put. I mean, everyone in movies got put under contract. If you were an actor, you did not get paid per film.
No.
You got paid through a contract that paid you like a weekly salary or whatever, and then you just basically did whatever work the movie studio told you to do. If that was making 50 movies in a year, you made 50 movies in a year. Like,
Yeah.
that was basically it. You didn't get like a commission. You didn't get anything other than the contract based salary. Like, maybe you could negotiate something if you were like Spencer Tracy or the like, but
Yeah.
or
You think like Edward G. Robinson, etc. You know, these actors were tied to a certain studio,
Yeah.
often to a certain genre of picture. There's only one major exception, and that's Stanley Kubrick and Warner Brothers. He was so powerful at the time as a director and so critically well thought of that he had the ability to convince Warner Brothers to essentially let him do what he wanted. But that's very few and far between. As you said, it was like a contractual obligation to make a certain amount of films a year, a certain type of film a year, and maybe now and again you'd be able to do a certain offshoot in a different genre.
It's also worth mentioning that Barton Fink is set in 1941, which of course is the year of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor,
Yeah.
which is sort of also like the dawn of a sort of apocalypse on its own, with World War II breaking out, for and America's entrance into that, and there are some other themes in the movie that sort of that mine that territory as well. Like, there are two detectives in the movie, one Italian and one German, and neither of them are particularly sympathetic towards Jews. Like, they're, but really, I mean, yeah, the movie at its heart is about Barton coming like out of the theater environment in New York, then getting hired. Like, he gets encouraged by his agent to sign a studio contract with Hollywood in order to make money while he can. And he basically does that and essentially sells out his integrity. And then he gets commissioned to do he gets tasked with doing a wrestling picture. Like, first he gets asked, well, what do you want to do? What kinds of movies do you want to do? And he can't answer it because he has no experience with movies at all. He probably doesn't even go to like the movie pictures. He's consumed
Well, and
by the
playwrights
theater.
are often about character studies, and you know that's what a playwright of that era would be thinking, a character study, you know, leaning into the mind of a character to explore that particular character or characters. Whereas this is, you know, essentially the film is that, but as someone who's coming to Hollywood, that's not what Hollywood wants to hear at all.
No, but then he gets tasked by Lipnick to do a wrestling picture with Wallace Beery, who was a famous actor at the time. and who did a lot of wrestling pictures, which is sort of an obscure part of Hollywood that's part of what the Coen brothers really, really love to sort of reference and pay homage to, which is another reason they sort of adore
It's a little
them.
slice, which didn't last that long either.
Yeah, and he gets completely flummoxed by this task because he knows nothing about wrestling. All he knows about are fishmongers in New York. Really.
Yeah,
And that's
which we come to
basically,
know about later on.
and that's like he starts that opening, which is very, very similar to the opening of the play that we see him put up in New York. And then he gets stuck on that page for very nearly the rest of the movie, and he gets completely unable to move on. And as he's sitting there in his hotel room, very uncomfortable, he hears noise through the walls. He hears crying. And he calls down to reception to Chet and complains about it. And Chet calls up to the room next to him, and then that guy crosses out of his room, and you see like the intimidating shadow, and you can actually feel like the anxiety of Barton, and it plays really, really well. I saw somebody talk about how like Barton Fink is the most terrifying film ever made to them because they have like crippling social anxiety. And Barton Fink is basically the ultimate example of what goes wrong when you actually confront somebody. And like Barton's decision to sort of confront the noise and complain about the noise in the other room is what basically spirals the events of the movie from there. But yeah, you can basically feel Barton's anxiety as his neighbor walks up to the door, and you see the shadow underneath the opening of the slim opening, bottom opening of the doorway, and knocks on the door, and he opens the door, and it's John Goodman playing the character of Charlie Meadows, his neighbor, outside, introducing himself, the common man that Barton keeps purporting to sort of represent. Like he views the lens through his plays and through his characters as the experience and the life of the common man. But of course, Barton isn't common himself. He's very much part of sort of the upper middle class intelligentsia, academia. Like you see him sort of moving around in those circles, even though he's not necessarily comfortable in them. He is ingrained in that environment at the start of the film. So he's very much not of the salt of the earth, sort of common man that he keeps purporting to sort of represent ideologically. But yeah, so they sit down and talk, and you even get the sense already there that even though he's like friendly and jolly, there is something really off about Goodman. Like and again, it also plays in with like there's something off about the hotel in general. Like everything is like sweaty and uncomfortable and grimy and just really not right.
It feels like the walls are closing in all the time because it's so
it's an extremely claustrophobic location, correct?
And of course, then you've got that the scene that you mentioned when he first meets John Goodman's Michael Meadows. Michael, is it? Am I getting that right? No, Charlie Meadows. Sorry,
Charlie Meadows.
The way that Charlie keeps attempting to tell him about his life and the real everyman working class that, as you said, Turturro's character Barton purports to be writing for. And every time he's about to tell him something, Turturro will just almost unknowingly ignore what he's about to say and just go off on his own tangent and kind of shut down what's being said. Completely unconsciously, in my opinion. He's so uninterested in the real person, the average citizen out there. He's so off in his mind about the true feelings and momentum of his writing and
Yes.
these high-end ideas that what Charlie has to say really doesn't matter to him. It's only later as the film develops, Charlie's voice becomes more important, almost as if every time he visits the room, there's slightly more weight to the character in Barton's eyes.
Yeah, I mean that is correct, and like I agree with you that it's not because like he's not a malicious, like Barton Fink is not a malicious character, and he doesn't.
Oh no.
He doesn't really do anything in the movie that sort of deserves the the backlash that he gets. Like it is sort of out of proportion to his crimes, because his crime is basically just being an arrogant douchebag. Like,
Yeah, and he just gets lost in his own consciousness. He's
his own ego.
He's
and his
high.
own-
He's high concept, and because he's high concept, that's all he's doing. His consciousness just floats away sometimes, and he gets so lost in it. And more and more as the film goes on, especially through visual metaphors and non-diegetic sound, that he just doesn't care about anything around him, but not in a malicious way.
Yeah, and I mean, it's good that you mentioned sound as well, because that is, I mean, the movie really comes together on all levels, both in terms of of the script, the visual aspect with the cinematography, which was their first time working with Roger Deakins after Barry Sonnenfeld went off to do his own. He went off to do The Addams Family, the first film that he did as a director, and the visual aspect, the literary aspect, and the audio aspect with Carter Burwell's sort of discordant score, which was very, very heavy on the strings, especially like the whiny pitches from strings that goes like almost psycho,
Well, I mentioned to you,
almost Psycho or Bernard Herrmann like.
Yeah, it was nowhere near as cinematic as the prior films. We've mentioned before that the prior three films in their filmography have far bigger scores or far more obvious motifs, whereas this is more discordant. It is more fractured. It does represent Fink's mind more effectively, which is very different from the prior films that they've made.
Yeah, I mean, quite. I mean, you can. Maybe. Oh yeah, no, you're right. Because Blood Simple does also have that memorable piano motif,
That motif.
and then there's the yodeling from Raising Arizona, and you have
the big score in Miller's.
Yeah, the Irish old folk song from Miller's Crossing, the Burwell sort of redid or repurposed. And then you have basically Barton Fink, which has no memorable motif,
No.
but is just sort of there to underpin the discomfort of the film.
I like the what you know how huge I am on mise en scène cinematography, and this is, I think, at least up until this point, their best film for that. Now you can make an argument for the way Blood Simple works. You can make an argument for the way Miller's Crossing sets up its elegant scenes often, but with this film in particular, there are little visual motifs which work so wonderfully well. There's a picture on the wall above his typewriter, which has a beautiful woman looking forward across the ocean on a recliner on a beach, and every now and again, in a bikini, and every now and again he will zone into that picture, and non-diegetic sounds will fill his mind. The beach, seagulls, and
crashing waves, like the surf,
kind of take him away a bit. And then the other most obvious. Well, first of all, the room in itself is brown and green. Now, green is often it can be things like nature, but usually when you're conveying meaning, green, it can be envy and greed and an uncomfortableness about it. And in this case, it's very grimy and it doesn't feel right. But then you've got the wallpaper, and there's this corner above the bed, which every now and again just peels down again. And I said at the time, it reminded me very, very much of what Scorsese did in Taxi Driver. In Taxi Driver, there's a scene where Travis Bickle, who at this point is really starting to unravel after seeing all the nastiness on New York streets after coming back from Vietnam. He's on the phone, and the camera simply pans from him on the phone to an empty corridor. And that visual representation is of his mind. And with this, the wallpaper is that representation. It's fragmenting here and there, and it's coming apart at the seams. And more of it comes apart as the film develops, and he keeps trying to put it back, as if to kind of re-establish his mind, but it still just keeps coming apart. And I think those visual motifs are so wonderfully done. And although it's a touch overt, it's not so overt that it overbears the scene.
I mean, it is kind of funny because one of their biggest inspirations for Barton Fink was, in terms of filmography, was actually Roman Polanski, who ended up actually chairing the grand jury at Cannes that year, and giving them the Golden Palm, which is just sort of a funny twist of fate. But yeah, they're very Barton Fink is very influenced by Polanski, especially
Do you think
in that
Cul-de-sac and Rosemary's Baby at that time, they got that grubby, uncomfortable feeling about them, and Barton certainly has that.
Yeah, and I mean. and the soundscape also goes beyond Burwell's score, where it's also, like you mentioned, like the non-diegetic sound, like the crashing waves and whatnot when Barton looks at the portrait on the wall, or when he hears the noise in the other room, or when he he meets his idol, W.P. Mayhew, who is like a great American novelist who is sort of
Played beautifully by John Mahoney.
who has gone into like writing movie scripts as well, but he hasn't found that transfer to be like Barton to be particularly useful. In fact, he's sort of devolved into alcoholism, where he's basically cut himself off from his ability to write anymore because of his rampant alcoholism. And that, I mean, he's sort of inspired by William Faulkner, although William Faulkner was never cut off from his alcoholism. He remained a functional alcoholic. But he's mostly inspired just by virtue of the fact that John Mahoney is practically the spitting image of William Faulkner. But yeah, I mean that scene with those scenes between W.P. Mayhew and Barton, and then Mayhew's secretary in quotation marks.
Inverted commas, yeah.
Yeah. Audrey. You use it as well because quite frequently it's just Audrey and Barton because Mayhew is just off in the background in a drunken rage, like
Screaming, shouting, puking, whatever it might be. Played beautifully by Judy Davis, by the way, Audrey.
Yeah. And yeah, that, like, again, the soundscape is just, it's such a wonderful way of keeping you uncomfortable throughout. Like, there's never really a moment in the film from the moment Barton appears at the Hotel Earl where you feel comfortable, where you get, like, the only moments that come close are when Barton looks at that portrait and sort of escapes to the
just more idyllic kind of
place
soundscape, yeah.
in the portrait, to that beach with that idyllic perfect woman. Yeah,
it's not as heavy as something like Lynch's Eraserhead, which is very industrial and always on top of you almost, or say something like The Lighthouse, which is very similar. That's a very, very heavy top-down soundscape that almost oppresses you. This is almost oppressing you from the sides, if you know what I mean. It's just little things that get under your skin or touch as you watch. The combination and coherency of the soundscape, both non-diegetic and diegetic, along with the dull, horrible mise-en-scène and the wallpaper coming down and the sweat that's dripping from every character as they talk. It all fits together to create this really uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah. And there's another character that Barton meets, played by Tony Shalhoub, who's basically the producer of the wrestling picture, who's the rapid fire dialogue character that the Coens love to write and are extraordinarily good at writing. And the scenes with him also are just fun. Like he, like it is sort of, because you sympathize with Barton because he's in that position where he's basically trying to bluff himself through it because he doesn't.
It's like a rabbit caught in the headlights in this Hollywood landscape he's not used to.
Yeah, because he hasn't written anything at all, and these people are expecting great. Like there's that moment where the first time he meets Jack Lipnick, and Lipnick basically sends him off with "We're all expecting great things from you," which is the one that really sort of puts the chains on.
And you can see
Barton.
by the posture of Turturro, as Barton, as he walks out of the room and turns a bit, the anxiety's already there before we even see Charlie walk to the door for the scene. He encompasses that anxiousness so well.
Yeah, because he's that the weight of those expectations are just completely crushing him. Especially because he also like it's a combination of the expectations that Lipnick puts on him and the expectations that he sort of puts on himself for making like the ultimate artistic product or expression of like human identity of the common man and all that stuff.
And the dichotomy between art and commerce, which is always there for a lot of artists that move to Hollywood from other more artistic mediums.
Yeah, I mean, not just artists to move, like artists everywhere, artists who try to make a living. Like,
Once you enter the Hollywood system, okay, you get films now and again that studios will, especially in this day and age. You look at the Oscars, and a lot of those films are studio led, but they have an almost indie label and a kind of given that little bit of leeway. That wasn't the case back then. You're talking about the traditional Hollywood studio system. So to create art in that environment, that's why you had such great genre filmmakers that could take a genre and create art through a genre, because that's what Hollywood wanted. And you would use metaphors, allegory, oblique reference, whatever it is. So to take a true artist, a playwright, and then to kind of throw them into the Hollywood fire pit, as it were, very difficult to then come out the other side and not have art win over. Commerce generally wins over art in that sense.
yeah, quite frequently. And again, I mean, that applies to like all media, music, painted art, whatever. Like that's always been the great sort of struggle of art and creativity, like yeah, compromise versus integrity. With some people like going to extremes to protect like one or the other.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so Barton meets the producer. He gets some tips on like that's also how he meets Mayhew. I think is from like a dinner party, or like going to a dinner. From what I remember, where he meets Mayhew in the bathroom.
Yeah, in the bathroom, which is an interesting scene in itself.
Yeah, and he also goes to like later on. The producer arranges a screening for Barton where he can view like old Wallace Beery wrestling films to sort of get inspired, which doesn't help him much either.
No, absolutely not.
And yeah, and then you have basically while that is running, you have the developing relationship between Barton and Audrey, Mayhew's secretary, where you sort of there. Barton feels a very definite attraction there. He comes off as a very sort of innocent, naive character. Barton does.
Very unworldly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you get the impression, that distinct impression, that he doesn't have a lot of experience with women. To
No.
put it mildly.
Bullied at school, probably quite enclosed in his life, put in a little box because of who he was, what his religion was, the way he looks. I mentioned at the time, it's not quite Eraserhead hair, but it almost is.
Yeah, I mean that is like Barton's look is one of the things that's drawn like a lot of comparisons to Eraserhead for sure.
Very similar.
Yeah.
And again, that very outside character who's struggling with things that a lot of people struggle with in different ways, but he's got so many struggles that they all combine into this jittery, anxious mess of a human being who can't quite correlate clearly when he's trying to complete this script. As you said, what does he get past? Not even the first page, probably the first paragraph. And then he starts rambling almost as he's typing and start writing single words that don't really offer any coherency to what he's trying to produce.
Yeah, and as he's sort of struggling in his hotel room, he keeps hearing noises from the other rooms. And it's worth noting that there is something very distinct about these noises, because they do all mirror stuff that Barton actually does himself inside his room. So the crying that he hears the very first time is mirrors the crying that he does when Charlie Meadows leaves for New York City later on. And Barton basically has a breakdown because now he's completely alone in that hotel room without any friends or anyone he can sort of lean on or confide in.
Like his consciousness is echoing the future around him in these rooms that we don't see.
Yeah,
as if almost every room in the hotel is his. Just at a future point.
Exactly. And then you have like the couple having sex is mirrors him and Audrey having sex.
Yeah.
The bumbling mirrors him wrestling with Charlie Meadows at another point, and him going up to sort of put tacks in the wallpaper to prevent it from peeling off. And yeah, all this stuff that sort of mirrors, which is really like again, it's not literally spelled out for you, but it's there to sort of pick up on, and then put your own spin or interpretation or meaning of it. Like, is that Barton hearing himself, or is it is he still literally just hearing the neighbors having sex, or whatever? Like it's left up to you to sort of make up your own mind about what that sort of represents in
It
terms of
reminds me a little bit.
Barton's
There's a
state of
horror film
mind and
called
whatnot.
1408, directed by Mikkel Hofstrom, and it's essentially about John Cusack, who is a fake real horror writer. He goes to hotel. He wrote one book and then he goes off to hotels and he tries to find real ghosts and real supernatural places in these apparently haunted hotels. He's been doing it for years, become incredibly jaded, and he gets his postcard sent. To invite him to room 1408 in this hotel, and he gets there, and in the end, the room starts showing him his fears and starts showing him incredibly nasty stuff. And this room, most people can only survive an hour for. And prior, there have been suicides and murders and all kinds of horrible shit has happened. But the director, Mikkel Hofstrom always said afterwards, he never wanted to put a label on how you should interpret or feel about that. He kind of wanted you to go in with John Cusack and think, what if it was my room? Well, how would the room interpret me? What would I get from that room? And that's what the Coens do. They're not throwing their mean so overtly at you that you have to understand it as that particular thing. They're letting you decide. How do you interpret what he's going through? As you said, are these conscious thoughts of future echoes? Is this a microcosm of his entire world? And this room is simply replicated throughout the hotel. And
Yeah.
we know we'll get to the end. We know what the hotel kind of becomes at the end ish, but it's up to you. You have to formulate your diagnosis, if you like, of the way you feel about the environment that he's in and the way he's processing that environment.
Yeah. For sure, I completely agree with you. But so to go back to the progression of the film, so eventually Barton is met in the lobby by the two police detectives that we mentioned earlier, one German, one Italian, and they interrogate Barton and basically tell him that Charlie Meadows, his neighbor, is actually not Charlie Meadows, and he's not the sort of common workman insurance salesman that Charlie Meadows has presented himself as. He is, in fact, a serial killer and a madman called Mad Dog or Madman Munt, Carl Munt.
Oh, yeah.
And and so they basically show him that Mayhew's dead. Like Mayhew's been killed and decapitated.
Yeah.
Or no, we should say before that. Before he meets the detectives, he actually starts an affair with Audrey. Like he calls Audrey in desperation. They the night after Charlie has disappeared and gone to go to New York City, ostensibly to talk to his home office at the insurance company where he's.
Oh, a little point before you move past that. Before Charlie leaves, Barton gives him his parents' home address because he really likes Charlie, and go and have a hot meal, and that kind of later on plays a little bit.
Yeah, and Charlie. No, that's later on that he leaves the package, isn't it? Or is
No,
it
not
when
the
he goes-
package. Not the package. The first time he says Charlie's got to go because he's going to New York, Barton gives him his parents' address.
Yes,
Says, go and have a
but-
hot meal.
No, I follow you there, but Charlie also leaves the package with him when he goes to New York, I think, from what I remember, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he leaves a package with him that ostensibly has all that's dear to Charlie in life in that package, and asks Barton to take care of it, and then he goes off to New York. And then in his desperation, because he's still stuck, like can't progress in his writing, so Barton basically calls Audrey in the middle of the night and asks her to come to his hotel room and help him flesh out the story, like basically because he has to turn in a synopsis to Lipnick over the and present it to him the next day. And so Audrey relents and comes to Barton in his hotel room. They have a conversation wherein Audrey basically reveals that the past few years she's been ghostwriting for Mayhew, where she's basically been, because he's been too drunk to really write. So he's basically just been feeding her sort of ideas and synopsises, and she's then been putting them on paper, which outrages Barton completely, even though that's basically what he's doing.
Yeah. And it's another lie,
Yes.
isn't it? Because almost everything in his world, we come to find, is a lie. Almost everything. The things he believes, the people he believes in, it all becomes a facade.
Yeah, and of course he has the facade of himself as the oracle of the common man, as it were, or the like the spokesman for the common man.
Mm.
And, like he is the true artist, like the true person with the integrity. Even though, of course, in his desperation, he turns to Audrey himself to help her, to get her to help him put thoughts on paper. And so she agrees to that, and then she starts to comfort him physically, and they have sex. And then when he there's this scene as they're having sex where it basically zooms to the camera, pans, and then moves to the bathroom, and goes down the piping, which of course refers to a remark that Charlie Meadows made earlier when he and Barton were talking about hearing the couple having sex, that all the sound, like you can hear all the sounds from all the rooms because of the piping in the hotel room, that it basically transfers sound everywhere. And so that's a nice little paper reference to that particular line of dialogue. And then they have sex, and Barton wakes up with Audrey dead next to him in a significant pool of blood. And yeah, it's a little reminiscent of the horsehead scene in Godfather with
Yeah.
with the guy waking up in the bed with all the blood and screaming.
The studio had, oddly enough.
Yeah, and then Barton in his no right, because no, it isn't after Charlie leaves, because Charlie's still there, of course. Because
Yeah, it's when everything happens with the cleanup, and then he leaves.
He enlists Charlie's help to clean it up. Yeah, and so Charlie helps him get rid of the body, and then Charlie leaves for New York. Yeah, which leaves him alone and desperate, and
with a box.
Yeah, and blood on one side of it, one section of his bed. Yeah, I mean, and then the detectives come by, tell him about Charlie Meadows' real identity as Kalmund, and ask him to keep an eye out. And they're less than thrilled with the information that Barton shares with them. It is funny at one point, the sort of insistence Barton has that his relationship with Charlie is not homosexual, that they were only wrestling.
Yeah, only wrestling.
Which does sort of lead towards some homoerotic readings of the movie and interpretations of the movie possible ones that I've read and heard from some people. But then, of course, he sits down with the body, with the sort of the memories of the body and whatnot in his mind, and the realization of Charlie, and he actually gets inspired to finally write, and he starts writing, and he writes the entire script basically in one go, and then he turns it in, and he's extremely proud because this is the best work he's ever done, like finally. And then
hold on. We should back up then, because prior to that, Barton goes to see Lipnick. And we should also mention Jon Polito as Lou, the assistant. He hasn't finished it yet, and he goes to see him. He's next to a swimming pool, and Joe is getting really frustrated because Barton can't tell him what the script is about. And then Lipnick explodes on Joe and fires him and says, "This is a true artist. We hired him to write this kind of stuff. We don't need to know what's in the script yet." And poor old Joe, Polito Lou, gets fired and scuttles off. And then move forward, and then to the bit you're talking about.
Right. I mean, it's good that you bring that scene up, because that scene is important. I mean, it also showed. It's also funny. I mentioned this, like the discrepancy between Polito's characters in Miller's Crossing, and then in this one, where in Miller's Crossing,
Civilly man,
he's big, bombastic, whereas in this one he's much more sort of subdued, downtrodden, which is sort of a type he kind of got typecast as for a fair bit. Like, also kind of plays a similar character in The Man Who Wasn't There, another Coen.
The Crow, another one he plays that kind of character as well, the shopkeeper.
And yeah, and he gets like, Lipnick tries to get Barton to sort of tell him the synopsis of the film, and Barton goes, "No, I can't. I mean, it's against my artistic process to sort of
I'll
share
tell you when it's
at
ready.
this
That's
stage." Yeah. I'll tell you when it's ready. And then Lou goes, "Yeah, no, we have you under contract. So if like Mr. Lipnick wants to know about the progress, you should tell him about the progress." And then Lipnick flips the lid, tells him to kiss his feet.
Yes.
Tells Lou to
Get on your
kiss
knees
Barton's
and
feet.
kiss his feet.
Yeah. And when Lou won't do it, he gets fired, and then Lipnick kisses Barton's feet instead, in this sort of symbolic act that's how committed they are to sort of monetizing the
artistry,
yeah,
the artiste.
yeah, and to sort of be able to put that spin and brand on their product.
Mm.
And yeah, and then it goes to back to Barton, who finally finds his inspiration, writes a script. And of course, as we see the script, we notice that it bears some pretty striking resemblances, not only in the opening, but also in the ending, to the play he put up on Broadway, where it closes with pretty much the exact same lines.
Artists repeating themselves.
Yeah, pretty much. And yeah, and of course, Lipnick is less than enthused with Barton's artistic integrity and his artistic product, because it doesn't fit in with the mainstream wrestling picture that
What does he call it? Crap or shit or something, doesn't he?
Yeah,
He's quite
I mean,
obtuse about it in the end.
they don't go to a wrestling picture to think; they go to a wrestling picture to be entertained. So,
Where's the wrestling? He says, I think, doesn't he? Where's the wrestling?
well, he complains, yeah, that there isn't a whole lot of wrestling. There's more wrestling with the soul than there is like wrestling with bodies. Yeah. And yeah, less than happy about it after. But of course, that's after the final confrontation, where the detectives go to visit Barton in his room because they suspect that Barton is indirectly aiding and abetting
In cahoots with,
Munt's
yeah.
killings, and they arrest him. And then Charlie Meadows, or Carl Munt, shows up in probably the most famous scene of the movie, where the entire hotel gets lit on fire, and Charlie kills the detectives. And of course, as he kills, I think it's the German one. I think or maybe it's the Italian that he kills with the words "Heil Hitler," as he basically gives him a headshot with his shotgun. And then he goes back and gives probably the most important speech of the film to Barton, where he basically chides Barton for not listening to him and for basically coming into his home. He's just a tourist, whereas Charlie lives there, or Kalmund lives there. He lives with all the pain of the people in this area, with the pain of the common man. Like, Barton only experiences that when he taps into it for his art, whereas Charlie lives with it.
But with his own greedy pursuits, almost, yeah.
And then he frees Barton, goes back to his room, basically just opens the door, goes back to his room while everything is on fire. And Barton then sort of sheepishly walks out, while the hotel presumably burns down. Although, I mean, you would have to think that the elevator and whatnot stopped operating, but apparently not.
No, it's just that level. That was
Yes.
Everything else was fine above it.
Yes.
It's a descent into hell. That's what the final section is.
That is. I mean, it is like very large parts of it look very much like an allegory of Dante's Inferno.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
And sort of descent and the circles of hell, the varying circles of hell. And there is also a very real argument of it being purgatory, especially with the ending of the movie, where Lipnick's punishment to Barton is basically to banish him to irrelevance, where he will never have he will still be under studio contract, but he will never actually get any movies made. Like, none of his scripts will ever amount to anything.
You will write them and write them and write them and write them, and you will never have prominence.
Correct. and sort of just banished to irrelevance and banished to that kind of purgatory. And there is also a deep allegory for that as well that's possible. But of course, the hell allegory is very, very obvious, because again, you only ever descend. The only time that's ever been where an ascent is ever seen in the movie is when Barton goes to the reception the first time he enters the hotel and rings the bell, and Chet then comes up from the basement to answer the bell. Which is also a great scene in terms of like the soundscape, like the ringing of the doorbell, where Chet has to sort of put the finger on it to stop the vibration. And then after the banishment, after the confrontation with Lipnick, who's infuriated with the script that Barton turned in, he goes to the beach, where he sees a woman almost practically taken right out of the picture in his hotel room, who sits down by the shoreline and gazes out over the ocean in a basically mirror of the image of the portrait from the hotel. And that's when the movie ends.
Yeah, it's a very. I think the Coens do this very, very well. It's quite a cyclical movie. It'll start with a particular idea. It'll elaborate, develop that idea, and then it'll swing back around to an element within the film in which it finishes on, to kind of bring it full circle. Maybe not narratively, but certainly in a meaning sense. It's more akin to Blood Simple than it is to the other two films so far in their filmography, but it's the most complex. Now, maybe for a cinematic academic like I bloody am, I guess it's not particularly complex to deconstruct, because the visual and audible motifs are very, very overt for me, anyway. But in terms of the coherency of that complexity, and then the performances, especially from Turturro and Goodman, it is complex. And the anxiety and struggle involved.
It's also complex in that, yeah, there are obvious interpretations you can make, but there are also less obvious ones, because it opens itself up to the gamut of it. So, like, yeah, you can read it as literally hell, but you can also read it as differently from that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, also you mentioned, Pearl Harbor. The German and Italian, the German and Italian particular detectives.
Yeah, and they both make like their anti-Semitism fairly clear with Barton. Yep. Like when they remark on the fact that Barton's able to, like, Barton being Jewish, that Barton's able to stay at the hotel, and the hotel has an open door policy, or like they don't have restrictions on their guests.
And as you mentioned, the homoerotic interpretation.
And then you get, of course, John Goodman's delivery of Heil Hitler when he shoots one of the men, which I think comes across to me less as Charlie Meadows sort of taking on that ideology than it is him sort of parrying it back at the fascists, the two German and Italian detectives, and sort of expressing that back to them, mirroring it back to them.
The representation encompassed in the little microcosm of the war, in terms of the Italian and Germans together. Yeah, and it's those strands. You can pull strands from Barton Fink all over the place and interpret them as you will. You can cross those strands and interpret them in many ways as well. And that's where the complexity comes from, because we mentioned at the start, your own reading, it goes with every Coen film to some extent, but this film in particular, many people have made films about a struggling writer with writer's block who's trapped in a small environment, but this is almost the quintessential version of that. But it's in such a way that's so grimy and grubby and kind of crawls under your skin a little bit. It's not your average take on that particular subject matter, but it's almost become that, because I don't think you can do much more with the subject matter.
No, I mean the film is very heavily mirrored later on by a later Coen film called Inside Llewyn Davis, which I actually think is even better than.
Oh, one of the ones I haven't seen,
than Barton Fink, with Oscar Isaac, but that shares a lot of the same themes, and similarly, like A Serious Man is another Coen film that also has sort of similar motifs in the way it opens itself up to sort of wide interpretation and doesn't give you any specific answers on what it actually wants to say.
I
I think Barton Fink is I mean, it's a beloved film, especially for academics for a significant reason, because it does lean so heavily into that symbolism aspect, which is really where a lot of academic bread is buttered.
Mm.
It is just so well constructed. Like Charlie's dialogue to Barton is so, like, in that final scene between them, is so applicable to so many aspects of life, where, like, you're that line, you're just a tourist, I live here, like it's applicable to so much, especially in charity. Like, you have these charity tourism, especially, where you have these people who go to third world countries to, like, just build a school or whatever, just so they can feel good about themselves, where it won't necessarily even help the local area, but it is just about them feeling good about themselves and telling, oh, aren't I good for
The
helping
notion
the
of
poor,
philanthropy rather than people
or
being
whatever.
truly
Yeah,
anthropic.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great
and
film.
and
As
also
you said,
sort
academics
of
take it
brown
all with it.
nosing at that local population, because, oh, look, they wouldn't be able to do any of this without me and whatnot.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm here now. I can help.
yeah,
And it's about self-aggrandization rather than
precisely,
truly
self-aggrandization. Yeah,
being, philanthropic and being objective, not subjective in the way that you approach something like that, which is difficult anyway, of course. When you do something kind for someone, it's the nature of humans to want the reciprocation of love or attention or being placed on a pedestal.
yeah,
And I think
or
that's a
like,
crux of what he's saying.
or the poverty tourism that you see in a lot of other, like, third world countries.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a very sort of applicable social commentary that remains relevant and will always remain relevant.
I feel like it's a bit like when academics look at this film. I'm banging on about bloody
It's very
academics like they're important in any
self-masturbatory.
way.
Yes.
It's very much like Nolan's Inception, because Inception is really just consciousness, microcosms of consciousness within microcosms of consciousness within microcosms of consciousness, and the visual motifs that are used to interpret each level of consciousness until you get to the final level of consciousness. The big ski fight off at the end, the big battle, and that's the way kind of academics look at it. But if you forget all that and you look at the strands of narrative and the meaning derived from the characters and the way they act, and the conscious strands of those narratives and the importance of them, it's far more effective than that. And I think every person who watches this, who comes from a unique perspective, whether it's a different nationality, a different rung of the social ladder, different prior experiences, you're going to come out with it with a little bit something else that someone else might not. And Hollywood films generally don't allow you to do that. Hollywood films are set up so that everything is usually linear, so that everything is usually set out so the editing is invisible completely, and the thought process is taken away from you because everything is provided to you on screen. And that's not what the Coens do. That's not
No.
what great directors do. That's not what David Lynch does. That's not what David Cronenberg does. That great directors pull back and let you think, let you cognate. And the Coens do it so beautifully in this film.
Yeah, it's also very, like pretty much every other Coen film. It's very tightly scripted, so
Yeah.
you still have a running time that goes far below the 2 hour mark, which is sadly not a common thing from film these days.
It's more akin to Blood Simple, because if you think Blood Simple, the very few locations that Blood Simple is set in, this is set in even fewer. Yes, you have
Yeah.
the bathroom, you have the outside in the park, you have a few, a Lipnick's place and the pool, a few other locations, but really, it's just the hotel room. Everything happens within that hotel room or down the corridor of the hotel room. So it's a very, very tightly shot and composed film. Everything is shot within those four walls, really, and it's done masterfully.
I mean, it is very telling, I think, that there's never been a director's cut of a Coen's film, because the cut that they deliver is the cut they want.
Well, there was one, don't forget, Blood Simple. It was just shorter, which you never hear of, than the actual theatrical release, which is ridiculous.
I think the widely disseminated Blood Simple is still the theatrical one, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. I think the one you can buy now on Blu-ray or whatever, I don't own it, but I think the one you can buy now on Blu-ray is what would be considered the director's cut. It's about 2 minutes shorter or something. It's just tightened. That's all it is.
And I mean, even then, it's certainly not labeled as the director's cut.
No. It's just blood
Um,
simple. Yeah.
yeah, but
It's a
so yeah,
fascinating character study, this film, and the way the mise en scène, the visual motifs, the non-diegetic sound, the script all bleed together is incredibly effective. And John Turturro's role, the way there's no wonder he became a staple later on of Coen films. Goodman already was kind of there with the performance prior in Raising, and they would go on to do other stuff. But Turturro in this, oh man! And then when I get to see him as Jesus in Big Lebowski, yeah, I can't wait to get to that film.
yeah, that, and also of course Bernie Birnbaum
Benny Birnbaum,
in
yeah,
Miller's
Miller's.
Crossing.
Yeah, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. But I think this performance in particular is his best in a
Yeah, I
Coen.
mean
So
this is the vehicle built for him,
yeah,
like built to sort of center and star him, and this is the one that really sort of put him on the map as an actor and defined him as an actor.
and the Coens, as you said, despite the greatness of Miller's Crossing, this was the
Yeah,
film that really blew them out of the park and made them conscious to the public, to people who love
yeah,
film.
because I mean, sadly, Miller's Crossing was not particularly appreciated at the time. Even,
Hmm.
I mean, it got decent reviews with critics, but it even got mixed reviews with critics, and it didn't see massive success at the box office. Though I mean, it came out the same year as Goodfellas, so in that
Any gangster
sort of
film in the
genre.
wake of Goodfellas is going to
Though
struggle.
I mean, you can argue that Miller's Crossing is really more a film noir. The Coens have certainly said so than it is
Yeah.
a gangster film.
Oh, it is. It absolutely is. The way the lighting works, the structure. It's very more reminiscent of a 30s, 40s film noir than it is
Yeah,
a
especially
full-on
because it's
gangster
also
film.
built like it's based on a noir novel by Dashiell Hammett, like The
Marshall
Glass
Hammett,
King.
yeah.
So
Well, I love Barton Fink. I think it's fantastic. It's one of the best character studies you'll find in film. Performances are outstanding. Everything you come to expect from the Coens by now is all there and heightened, even more so. It's more akin to Blood Simple, I'd say, than the other two films that they made up to this point. And just find a way to watch it.
and
It's
it's
currently on the BFI player. Did we watch it on the BFI player? It was, wasn't it?
yeah, it was.
Yeah, BFI player in the UK. So if you want to, there's a free trial you can get for 7 days if you want to watch it, or you can subscribe for the monthly. But it's well worth it, and it's just a fantastic film. It's not a film you're going to walk away from and not think about. You're going to have to think about it, and it's worth several viewings to peel
That
back the layers that maybe you don't catch. I mean, we've seen it before, and we understand this stuff, so the layers are all there. But if watch it 2 or 3 times, and you'll peel back the layers
it has
and see all the meaning.
no. I mean, for sure. I mean, it has to be said that goes for pretty much every Coen film.
Yeah.
Like Coen films are the type of films where very often they get better every time you watch them because you always discover more. You always see stuff that you didn't notice on earlier viewings, and then start to appreciate more. And that's especially true with a film like Barton Fink, with a film like A Serious Man, or a film like Inside Llewyn Davis, or No Country for Old Men. Like these are all film, or for me, Miller's Crossing. These are all films that are enhanced with repeated viewings.
I think the first viewing of any Coen's film is scratching the paint off,
Yeah,
because what you pay attention to are the performances, the music, the soundtrack. You might look at some great vistas and things like that, but you need them to pull it back again to look at the visual elements, the mise en scène, the editing structure. Pull it back again to look at the shot composition. Pull it back again for those characters to have 1 or 2 lines but have so much importance. Pull it back again, and then you start getting into the further meanings and the auxiliary meanings which feed into that. It's just it's a wonderful piece of filmmaking, and I can't. I mean, there's 3 or 4 films I haven't seen. I think there was 3 that I hadn't seen at all when we looked at their whole filmography, and there's not a film that I've seen of theirs that isn't just sublime in some way. They're all very different, a lot of them, but the complexity is only matched by the cinematic prowess as filmmakers. It's all over every shot.
yeah, which is both a testament to their like skill as filmmakers, and also, I mean, you certainly would be right in ascribing a lot of that to also the people they work with, like Roger Deakins, but it's
Roger
also
Deakins, fantastic.
a testament to how they help these people work, because the environment that the Coens provide on their set is so conducive towards this because of how prepared they are. From the moment people show up on set, they have like meticulous notes and storyboarding on how every single aspect of every single scene is supposed to be shot and given up, and even the actors see that, and so they know exactly where is my mark going to be, what are the specific words of dialogue I'm going to use, which is also one reason why they lean so heavily towards theater actors. It's because these are actors who are used to just working from scripts. Like, you do not ad-lib Shakespeare. Similarly, you do not ad-lib Coen scripts. You just deliver what's on the page. And then you're free to sort of work within the parameters of that delivery and what's on that page. You're free to put your spin on that, but you work from that.
Yeah, it's what I call the Coens alumni. And the alumni are there because the Coens are so good. It's not dissimilar to Scorsese and people like Thelma Schoonmaker, or the actors that he often works with. Joe Pesci, De Niro initially, DiCaprio now. You see these actors and the surrounding crew, the editors, the cinematographers. There's a reason they go back and work with these filmmakers. It's because they understand them. Everything works cohesively and effectively, and they feel comfortable in what they're doing, and that's what the Coens do for their alumni, as it were.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I can't recommend it highly enough, and I think the problem with watching all these Coen films is there's not going to be a moment when I'm going to go, do you know what, this is shit, don't watch it. every one of these is going to end with one of us going, that was sublime, go and watch it, it's fantastic, but it'll always be for different reasons.
I mean, the two low points are definitely Lady Killers and Intolerable Cruelty, but those are separate because partially they're not, like, Intolerable Cruelty is not really a Coen script. Like, it's a script that came to the Coens and then they revised it a bit, but it's not really a Coen script. And then Lady Killers is, of course, a remake of an older British comedy that the Coens then sort of put their spin on, so it's not quite a full-on Coen film either, though you could make that same argument with No Country for Old Men, which is also an adapted work.
An adapted screenplay, yeah.
But those are sort of the blips on in the library for me. But even those are like the average Coen film is like at the top end of a lot of other directors' work, I think.
Yeah, very, 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 very much so. If you can meet the lower end of the Coen standards, then you're doing something very, very well, I would say.
Yeah.
Right, we'll go and bloody watch it. Fourth film in the Coens' filmography. We'll be covering Hudsucker Proxy. Is it Hudsucker Next, isn't it, I think?
Yes, it is.
Yep, Hudsucker Next, which is comedy. Tim Robbins, excellent in it. It's got a great deal of pathos, this film. It's really funny at times, dramatic
and
at times.
Coen's take on corporate culture,
Corporate culture, corporate America, yeah, with the hula hoop.
Yes. Has one of the single greatest montages in all of film history.
It does, yeah. I'm picturing it now. Yeah, no, it does. So yeah, join us again for some more Coens. Make sure you go and check us out on Podbean now. I put everything on there. I'm trying to work that out. And don't forget, I've put the Miller's Crossing podcast in the description, and I'll also put the prior two Coens in the description as well. So by the time we finish, there'll be 20 links all in a row, and you can watch every single one to your heart's content. Right, thank you very much for joining us on this fine last podcast evening. I have been Citizen Sleeve, and as always, I'm joined by the fantastic
Silver Hawkins.
And we'll see you next week for another dose of film. Take it easy.
Take care.